Welcome to History Talks. I'm your host Will, and this is Sebastian. Today we continue our series on the Crusades, and we will be discussing the Fifth Crusade. So Sebastian, tell me, what led to the Fifth Crusade?
Before we begin, two corrections for last episode that I feel are pretty significant. One, I said that the Pope was competing with the House von Hohenzollern. It was actually the House von Hohenstaufen. Hohenzollerns don't even become significant until much later. Two, I said the Mongols invaded around 1204. While the story about Enrico Dandolo selling the maps is true, that was the 1220s when they invaded Russia.
Okay, good, and I'm glad we got that cleared up. So now let's move on to the Fifth Crusade. So Sebastian, tell me, what led to the Fifth Crusade?
First of all, Pope Innocent III, yes, the same Pope Innocent III from last episode. This is only like 10 years after the Fourth Crusade.
Okay, good. That's good to have that context where we know. And what year are we talking about when we say it was 10 years later?
So 1212,
okay.
Yeah.
1212, Pope Innocent III. What happens?
So he's thinking, alright, it's time for another crusade. He's just finished the Albigensian Crusade, which is basically where he had a bunch of knights go to Aquitaine and then just kill everyone there because a good portion of them were Cathar. Specifically at Béziers, the bishop said, "Kill them all, God will know his own."
Let me stop you there. What's a Cathar?
The Cathars were a religious group. They're Gnostic, which is a whole can of worms in and of itself.
Okay, we won't get into that then.
But basically what you need to know is that they were considered heretics by the Catholic Church and would still be considered heretics by most modern Christian denominations.
Okay, got it. So they had a group they considered heretical and they wanted to put an end to them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they purged Béziers and killed everyone, and killed pretty much everyone there. Some sources from the time describe similar levels of destruction to how Genghis Khan's destructions were described. So anyways, the Albigensian Crusade, it succeeds in purging Aquitaine of Cathars and Catholics too, but never mind that.
Okay.
And the Pope's like, alright.
You said in Catholics too?
Yes.
Why were they purging Catholics too?
Well, the Cathars looked exactly the same as the Catholics. And
okay, just some collateral damage. They thought they were taking out Cathars, but they were really getting Catholics.
Yeah. To quote Bishop Amalric, "Kill them all, God will know his own."
Okay.
So after this Albigensian Crusade, the Pope is thinking, alright, let's take this Crusader momentum from the Albigensian Crusade and try to do the whole Jerusalem thing again, Except this time, I'm going to try to take the proper precautions to make the Fourth Crusade not happen again. So step one, he summons the Fourth Lateran Council, which is an ecumenical council whose basically their most important decree is that Crusaders have to go all on the same route. The Crusaders have to rendezvous, and then they have to all go to the same goal. And going off and doing something else without permission is, that's desertion.
Okay.
Pope Innocent also makes a decree that says that if you make a large financial contribution to the crusade, then especially if you are not someone who's trained in fighting, that can count as, participating in the crusade. That can count for the same remission of sins.
Okay.
And then finally, he's like, alright, let's get all of the kings, let's have all of them meet up, and they can create a plan. though we're still doing the Egypt thing. I really like Richard the Lionheart's plan of going to Egypt. So that's basically what he does. He gets all the kings and the Holy Roman Emperor to prepare their armies so they can so that they can go to Egypt and figure it out from there, presumably.
Okay.
But the king of Hungary decides that his resources would be better used just going to Jerusalem. He doesn't like the whole Egypt plan. So King Andrew II of Hungary, he summons a large army, the largest individual army of any of the Crusader lords during the Fifth Crusade. And he takes it, has them all rendezvous at the town of Split, and then they
Where is Split?
In Croatia.
Okay.
And King Andrew actually has enough money to pay the Venetians, so he hires Venetian boats, because this time he actually has the money. And at this point in history, Venice has the biggest navy in Europe. So he takes these ships and goes to the Kingdom of Jerusalem. He has a brief victory against the Ayyubids at Jaffa, who are not expecting an attack. But then eventually the Egyptians are able to corner his army, and he is ultimately defeated and forced to go back to Hungary. But then all the other Crusader kings come and go with the actual main plan. Andrew has the largest individual army of any of the Crusaders, but he just went off and did his own thing, and it almost worked. But it succeeded in forcing the Muslims to decide that their best course of action was to dismantle Jerusalem's defenses so that they could lure the Crusaders to try to take the city and then encircle them. But Andrew just he failed.
Okay. So he failed there. He was successful before that, though, right?
He succeeded at his first battle, but eventually
the second battle was he lost.
He lost the element of surprise with his second battle.
Right.
So
okay. Was that the only front?
No, because then the other crusading army, actual one, comes, and they go...
Oh, the actual one. Andrew's army is just a precursor to the full army.
Yeah, because Andrew just wanted to do
He wanted to come in, do his own thing, get the element of surprise, which he did in the first case, but in the second case he did not. So then a larger army comes in behind him. Is his army completely defeated after the second battle, or are they able to recoup and fight on some more?
They're entirely defeated.
They're entirely defeated. Okay, so
all they have is
they won a battle, they lost a battle, they're done. Okay, then a much larger army comes in behind them, and what do they do?
So they go to a city on the eastern half of the Nile Delta called Damietta.
Okay.
Damietta is this ancient city that is a large trading hub and a large fortification on the Nile. So the Crusaders decide that their best course of action is to try to take Damietta. So first they take the tower of one of the tower fortifications in Damietta pretty successfully, quite easily. But then the rest of the city, the rest of the city is able to hold on for a while. And eventually the Ayyubid Sultan, Al-Adil, as I recall, he's surprised by this attack as well, because he thought, okay, there's just this one king, he's just doing his own thing, and plus there was just a crusade, like a decade ago. There's no way, they have another one already. But lo and behold, the Crusaders attack Damietta, and when the Ayyubid army tries to attack the Crusaders, despite suffering from disease, are able to use their heavy cavalry to defend against the Ayyubids and push them back. And eventually they are able to starve out Damietta, and the siege is successful. Then the Ayyubid Sultan dies, and he's succeeded by his son, Al-Khalid, I believe it's pronounced. Now, Al-Khalid's first reaction upon becoming Sultan and having to deal with these Crusaders is he sends them a peace offer which says, hey, if you give Damietta back, we'll just let you have Jerusalem. You can have it. Okay, so they siege Damietta, and Al-Qabil, the Sultan, he sends them an offer. The offer reads, hey, if you give us Damietta back, we'll let you have Jerusalem. You can just take the city. Now, at first, many of the Crusader lords are excited by this deal, but then the main leader of the crusade, a cardinal of all people, because Pope Innocent III still felt that because they had a bishop as a leader in the First Crusade, at least in name, the perfect idea was to have a cardinal lead the Fifth Crusade.
Okay.
So the cardinal says, no, I don't like this offer, and rejects the offer. At first, many of the Crusader lords don't like his reaction, and one duke just straight up leaves. But then they start to think it through, and they realize that the terms of the agreement would only give them the actual fort and city of Jerusalem, and not many of the forts that they would need to actually, protect and keep a hold on Jerusalem.
I see.
So they decide to go down south to Cairo. Cairo is the capital of the Ayyubids, so therefore would obviously be an important city.
Okay.
But Al-Qabil is a crafty one. He lives in Egypt. He knows for a fact how the Nile works. It rises, it floods, and when it stops flooding.
Okay.
The Crusaders they're from Europe. They don't know anything about the Nile or its flooding cycles.
Okay.
So Al-Qabil manages to get the Crusaders to go down south to Cairo, but then lure them onto a little island in the middle of the Nile.
Okay, a place where they're going to be flooded.
Yeah, where they're just stuck because of the floods.
Right, okay. And does that work?
Yeah, it works well for Al-Qabil. He's able to defeat the crusading army.
What do they do? They're stuck on an island? Are they able to build rafts?
They briefly get stuck on islands, and sometimes they just get disconnected from supply lines, and basically the flooding of the regular flooding of the Nile basically makes it so the crusading army sometimes has to just pause, and Al-Qabil can make sure that he always has his army maneuvered in the specific place to take full advantage.
I see.
And
that slows them down enough that he can maneuver wherever he needs to.
And that's not the only advantage he had on his side, because unbeknownst to him, the Crusaders were expecting reinforcements that were almost certainly not going to come. Basically, the King of Georgia had pledged to help the Crusaders. Now, the Kingdom of Georgia was Orthodox, and Orthodox Christians didn't have the best relationship with the West after the Fourth Crusade, but Georgia was willing to support a retaking of Jerusalem, especially when the King of Georgia felt like he felt pretty secure. He had a bunch of recent victories and could raise a rather large army.
Okay. But he did not send reinforcements as he had promised.
Because of the Mongols.
Oh, okay. He was busy fighting the Mongols. So it wasn't a choice. It wasn't by choice that he did not follow through on his agreement. He just got attacked and had to take care of the Mongol problem.
Yeah, and he first sent the letter to Pope Innocent III, who found out when the crusade had already been launched. So by the time the news got to the Crusaders, the crusade was already over.
Okay.
So the Crusaders were okay with moving slowly if they thought that the Georgian reinforcements were coming, but they weren't. And that was not the only reinforcements they seemed to somewhat expect. You see, there was an urban legend. There was a folk tale, I guess you could call it, about the idea of a king named King David, who was known as Prester John. Now, this Prester John myth its exact origin is debated by scholars. Some see it as a misinterpretation of the Mongol horde coming in and destroying Muslims as, oh, they're fighting the Muslims and they're successful, so obviously it's a Christian king.
Right.
And that's the most prevailing theory as to where the idea of Prester John comes from.
I see. But anyway, the main crusading army there is shut down, and it's due to geographical, or largely, maybe there may have been other components, but largely due to geographical issues, right?
Yeah.
They just did not know the terrain. They were outmaneuvered, and they did not get a reinforcing army that they were hoping for because that army was busy fighting another invasion. Okay, so what happens then? Do they just give up and turn around and go home?
They try to press on to Cairo to see maybe if they can take the city of Cairo, they can gain control of the Nile and then end up defeating Al-Qadil anyway.
Okay, so they're determined, despite having the odds stacked against them, despite the terrain being against them, despite not having this reinforcing army they were counting on, they are determined to get to Cairo. And how does that go?
Well, Al-Qadil manages to encircle the army and and back them up against the Nile. So Al-Qadil defeats them, forces them to retreat back to Damietta, but then he uses his light cavalry to then swoop in and eventually encircle the army again to the point where the leader of the crusade has to surrender, totally surrender.
Okay.
The army is... So the terms of this treaty are this crusading army, this large crusading army, it's disbanded. Everyone goes home. An 8-year truce will be established between the Latin Christians and the Egyptians so that they could take care of any losses from Damietta and deal with their recent wars against the Sultanate of Rum.
Okay.
And the only benefit the Crusaders get is they're promised a piece of the true cross, a relic that was lost after the Second Crusade, but it turns out Al-Qadil does not have the true cross. In fact, I'm not even sure where the true cross is at that point in history, so that promise never comes through.
Okay, so does that end the Fifth Crusade?
Yeah, that's straight up how it ends.
Okay, so the Fourth Crusade was still considered the worst crusade, although the Fifth Crusade sounds like it didn't go too well.
It didn't really do anything.
Didn't do. Okay, so this army that marched down the Nile, they really didn't have that many casualties. It was just kind of a lost cause, but most of the soldiers ended up going home. Is that correct?
Yeah, a decent portion of them did.
Okay, so that's why it's not the worst. It's the losses were not the worst. It just they launched an offensive, and the offensive essentially was repelled and went nowhere, and they went home. Okay,
exactly.
Okay. And so they went home, and then what happened there? Is there anything else of significance that happened related to the Fifth Crusade?
Well, during the Fifth Crusade, Pope Innocent III caught a disease and died.
Yeah.
Died like a year into the crusade, and
How long did the crusade last?
about like a year, a couple years.
Oh, a couple years. Okay, so he died maybe halfway into it. Okay, and then what happened?
His successor, believe that was Urban III, I think.
Okay, that's okay. So his successor supportive of the crusade?
His successor was one of the main guys who was pushing for the Crusaders to stay determined and move on to Cairo. But he ended up being the one who ended up saying, yeah, I guess we kind of have to take this deal.
Okay, he finally accepted that it was it was a lost cause. Okay.
The only really successful part is the fact that some of the Dutch Crusaders made a pit stop in Portugal to help the King of Portugal siege a large Muslim city called Alcácer do Sal.
Okay.
Not the largest city, but it was key for later taking Seville.
Oh, okay. Because at this time, much of the Iberian Peninsula was occupied by the Muslims. Is that correct?
Yeah. Thanks to the Second Crusade, the Christians had more than 51% of it, but there was still a large Almohad presence.
Okay. That's another interesting thing. Is why do you think the Pope was launching an offensive over in the Eastern Mediterranean and going for Jerusalem when part of Europe, the Iberian Peninsula, was under Muslim control? Why do you think the crusade that he was directing was not launched at retaking that portion of Europe?
Well, there's a few different ideas. One is there's a few different possible reasons for this. Mm-hmm. One is that the Christians in Iberia were already successful. The kingdoms of Castile and Leon and Aragon were having victories on their own against the Muslims, and it was just the larger forts that they sometimes needed help on.
Okay. Additionally,
Jerusalem is a holy site, even more significant than the burial place of Saint Santiago.
I understand.
And third, Muslim Spain had just existed so long that it wasn't even thought of as much as a Muslim occupation, so much as just more Muslim lands that the Christians need to reconquer.
I understand that. I'm just saying it's kind of curious to me that they would not try to reclaim. I mean, since Europe is associated with the word Christendom, right? It's interesting to me that they were not trying to first Europe, and then from there, once they have that, then go over to the Eastern Mediterranean. You know, maybe we don't know the reason why, but to me, it's kind of curious that was not their priority.
But there is one interesting additional cause that you can look into, and that is the idea of a separate identity between Northern Europe and Mediterranean. Because if you look back to the Roman Empire, practically, for most practical purposes, North Africa and the Mediterranean Europe were thought as closer together than Mediterranean Europe was to Northern Europe, and plus because of the strong cultural divides between the different religions, the continental identity wasn't as important as the religious identity. So when you see these boundaries, it becomes less and less important, this idea of a continent of Europe, and more of just the boundaries of Christendom. This is what Christendom has, and then Christendom just expands wherever Christendom needs to expand.
Okay, so if you look at the Roman Empire, from what, about say 1,000 years before this crusade, it essentially encircled the entire Mediterranean region, right?
Yeah.
So you're saying from that perspective, the Pope or one of the leaders, one of these Crusader lords, may look at any part of the Mediterranean as equally as important as the Iberian Peninsula along the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah, it's only really with the fall of Constantinople and the complete reconquest of Iberia that you really get this strong sense of, okay, this is Europe and this is Asia and Africa.
Yeah, I get that. It's just it's interesting that geographically they're all connected there. It seems sort of like it's a natural region. You know what I mean?
Like the continent of Europe.
Yeah, the continent the peninsula there, which is connected only to the rest of Europe, seems like it would be a natural. It would naturally be something you would. To me, it does. You know, maybe they have a completely different perspective. Maybe they have reasons I don't understand, or they clearly do have reasons I don't understand. But from my perspective, just geographically, because it has, you also have control over, Gibraltar and control over access to the Mediterranean. That peninsula, as an entry point, the southwest corner of Europe seems like a very important strategic place. Whereas going around the eastern Mediterranean and then even down into Egypt seems kind of like an extension of something, whereas the Iberian Peninsula for the Italians is closer to home, or for Rome, for a pope in Rome is closer to home. But that's just what it seems like from my perspective. I'm assuming they had different reasons.
Yeah.
We just don't, and you said what you thought some of the potential reasons are, but to me, I don't really understand that.
Yeah.
But are there any closing words you wanted to say about the Fifth Crusade?
Honestly, the Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Crusades almost like the Fifth Crusades 5 through 8 don't get talked about out that much, and that's just because
sounds like not a whole lot happened in the Fifth Crusade,
Yeah, and you can kind of see this same pattern in the 7th and 8th Crusades, or less, and in the 6th Crusade, though to a lesser extent in the 7th.
Okay. All right. Well, we will continue that in a future episode. So thank you, Sebastian. Good job.
All right.
And we hope to see you all in our next episode in the series on the Crusades.